Welcome to the Lifelong Rivals Sports Podcast. I'm Zach Kaufman here with Ryan D'Amico, back from a little Christmas break and New Year's break.
We will get into our NFL Week 17 breakdown. Last week of the year, Zach, look, there weren't a lot of games that mattered, but the games that did matter, some crazy things developed.
Yeah, this is one of the more memorable, fun finishes I remember in the NFL, where there were some significant games. There were a lot of games there, especially at that 4:30 time slot, that really meant something and ended up being very close and coming down to the very end until it was decided. So the first game we'll get into is a team that had an incredibly strong finish, ended the season on a win. The San Francisco 49ers, they were winless for most of the season and then won 6 of their last 7 to finish 6-10. So quite the impressive finish, including 5 in a row there with Jimmy Garoppolo starting. I think this team has situated itself well to really step up, and we've seen the fall of the Seattle Seahawks, how they're not the elite team they've been before, and I think this is a team that could potentially overtake them within the division if they continue playing anything to the level they are. They won 34-13 playing against the Rams, although the Rams were not starting their number one unit in any form. They had Sean Mannion at quarterback. They had just a bunch of names throughout the stat sheet that very likely you wouldn't really recognize, or you'd recognize them as kind of a bust, like a Tavon Austin. But they didn't put their starting unit out. They had their spot in the playoffs clinched. That they finished the season 11-5, which is a huge improvement, and huge respect to this Rams team for turning it around like they did to win that division and finish with that 11-5 record.
Yeah, I mean, what a turnaround. I mean, that just goes to show you, I mean, what a fuck-up Jeff Fisher was. I mean, really. I mean, this is a guy that's continuing to go 8-8 every year, 7-9, 6-10, and Sean McVay's first year he comes in and he turns his team around and they go 11-5. It looks like McVay will probably win Coach of the Year, and he deserves it. I mean, this team was last in the league in scoring last year. If the stats held serve, they were first or second this year. I mean, so just a monster turnaround for the Rams, and they go into the playoffs winning the division, and they go into the playoffs as the 3 seed. So they're sitting pretty good, and they'll have an interesting matchup this weekend against the Falcons, which we'll get into those matchups a little later after we talk about Week 17. As for the Niners, Zach, this is funny. I think people need to pump the brakes a little bit on Jimmy G. Look, I know it's fun. I know it's been great. I mean, they've reeled off all these wins in a row. He's looked great. The team is, people are saying this is a potential top 10 team in the league right now. They could take this division next year. I think you need to put things into perspective here. Okay. Let's look. So they won 6 in a row to end the year? 5 in a row.
5 in a row.
They won
6 out of 7.
And let's talk about who they beat, Zach. Okay. They beat the Bears. They stink. They beat the Texans. They stink. They beat the Titans, who were in a free fall up until this last week. They beat the Jaguars. Good win. That's a good win. Jaguars were playing really good football, and they hung 44 points on the Jaguars. That's a nice win. I'm not taking anything away from them. And then you beat the Rams with all their backups in. Not much tape on Jimmy G either. I mean, let's remember, Nick Foles threw 27 touchdowns and 2 interceptions in his first stint on the Chip Kelly offense, where no one had any film on him, no one had any film on Chip Kelly's offense. Now look where Nick Foles is. So I think we need to see Jimmy G next year when people have more film on him, people can game plan more for him. Look, it's a good story. Don't get me wrong. And I know how in our country and in sports you love a good story. I just think we need to kind of press the brakes a little because the surrounding cast around him isn't very good. And to think that they're going to make a huge leap next year, I don't see it. This is possibly like a 500 team next year, and I'm sure they would take that. But I don't want people to get too ahead of themselves on Jimmy G.
I see what you're saying, and in no way do I think they're going to win the division next year, but I do think they can compete there with Seattle for second in the division, which would put them right around that 500 level, which is around where Seattle finished this past year. So one player I do like for this team that's really stepped up is George Kittle. I think he's pretty well established as their tight end of the future here. This was his rookie season. He had 100 yards in this game. He's been kind of up and down, but really, when it comes to rookie tight ends, it's very, very rare you see them producing during their rookie season. And we saw Evan Ingram this year have a very good year. But even some of the high picks, David Njoku, O.J. Howard, they were very similar to what George Kittle put up with very up and down seasons. And I think he'll be someone that they can rely on in the future. They have some question marks there at running back with Carlos Hyde, if he'll be back or not. They also, this past year, drafted Joe Williams, who I know the coaching staff really liked. Unfortunately, he missed the entire season on IR, so that could be interesting moving forward. Plus, they're going to still have a solid draft picks in every single round, with finishing with a 6-10 record. I'm not sure where exactly their pick's going to be, but it should be
ninth. I think they're ninth, Zach.
Okay, yeah, I was thinking it would be right around the top 10. So that's still a great position for them to add some good pieces to the defense, to the receiving core. They also have Pierre Garçon, who's going to be returning. He was their number one receiver, who they lost early in the season. I don't know how much he still has left. He's been around in the league for quite a bit, but he's definitely an upgrade on what they've had. And I think that'll free up someone like Marquise Goodwin, who's just kind of a deep threat guy, to get more action for this team and be able to make more plays for them. So I think they have some pieces, but they still need to make some important moves moving forward.
The important thing is they do have their quarterback, and then now they can build around them, which is what every NFL team wants to do.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. That a lot of other teams that are struggling and have a poor record like that do not have. They're still missing out on any kind of good quarterback. So, like we mentioned, the Seattle Seahawks, we're going to move to them, and their disappointing finish here. They could not win their final game against an Arizona Cardinals team with – this is their third quarterback now with Drew Stanton. They've had Blaine Gabbert. Carson Palmer was their starter. He just announced his retirement today. So they're a team. We mentioned the 49ers, who have their quarterback and need to build around him. This Cardinals team has some pieces around them, but they don't have a quarterback now. So they're kind of in the opposite situation.
They actually don't have a quarterback on the roster. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. All of their quarterbacks' rosters expired, and especially now with Palmer retiring, they don't have a single quarterback signed.
Because I saw they were interested in re-signing Blaine Gabbert, who was their backup throughout a good portion of this year. So that's something that could happen, that they have him to kind of hold over, depending on if they draft someone, if they can pick up someone like Kirk Cousins, trade for someone like A.J. McCarron. Those are some of the names we hear pretty regularly. There's some other guys that are going to be free agents, but someone like Drew Brees, pretty confident he's heading back to the Saints. So we'll see if they're able to make some kind of move, or what they're able to do with that quarterback position. But that definitely hurt them this year without having an actual starting quarterback for most of the year. But from them, we're going on to Seattle. This is a team that disappointed throughout the year. They were carried basically 175% on the back of Russell Wilson. Whatever he did was how they finished. They just did not get much contributions beyond them. It'll be very interesting to see, with their disappointing finish here, losing to this mediocre Cardinals team, what they end up doing with their running back position, which was a mess all year. They tried so many different running backs, came into the season thinking it was going to be Eddie Lacy and I believe Thomas Rawls that were battling out for it. Yep. Neither of them finished contributing much at all. Rawls had 8 yards. Lacy has been a healthy scratch for a long time. Mike Davis was their biggest contributor towards the end of the season. He had some good games. He had some good moves. He's very quick. I haven't seen from him the production you'd like to see in someone that's going to be a number one running back, but he might be a piece they can keep around as they add someone else to try and do something. But they've had so little success trying to add running backs the last couple of years. They signed someone like Eddie Lacy. They drafted someone like CJ Procise. They just a lot of their moves have not worked out at that position since Marshawn Lynch was there.
Yeah, I mean, look at those names, though, Zach. I mean, you can't put a lot of stock in a guy like Eddie Lacy, who he hasn't had his weight under control in God knows how long. I mean, and a guy like CJ Procise from Notre Dame. I mean, he's not a guy that's going to come in and be a difference maker for you. I mean, I think you pin this on management and the way they're handling the whole. I mean, they need to go out and get an impact playmaker, whether it's via the draft or via taking a shot on a big time free agent. So I put it in that. To me, this is staggering. I just went through their schedule because I was curious at the number because I knew it was a pretty high, in relation to other years. That home field advantage, quote unquote, that was such a big deal since they've started their, kind of role that they've been on. This team lost 4 games at home this year, Zach. I mean, this is a team that Central League field is supposed to be a place where teams come in and don't win and don't have a chance to win. 4 teams came in there and won. So, I mean, I think Seattle has a lot of problems, and I don't think that this is like a hiccup season. I think this is the start of a downward trend. I really do. We see it with teams all the time, Zach. I mean, it's the NFL. Unless you're the Patriots or the Steelers, which has probably been the 2 mainstays in football for the last, decade plus, you're going to have you have your time at the top where you have the windows open for so long, and then that window shuts and slowly shuts. And I think that's what you're seeing here with the Seahawks. I mean, Pete Carroll came out today and said that Cliff Averill and Cam Chancellor, 2 mainstays on that defense for a long time, they might not play football ever again because of their neck injuries. So, I mean, things are just not going in the right direction for Seattle. I think we talked about it in our last show. The baton kind of being passed over to the Rams, and I think you're going to really start to see that again next year. So, in a must-win game, just an absolute awful performance. I mean, I know they needed Atlanta to lose, which we'll get into here in a sec, but say they did lose. It wouldn't have mattered because you don't handle business at home against the Arizona team that has nothing to play for. I mean, it makes you wonder. It really makes you wonder.
Yeah, didn't even give themselves a chance losing this game to an Arizona team that would have had a losing record if they would have lost this game. Just a very disappointing season from them until this was probably their biggest win of the season. But like you mentioned, when it comes to Seattle's defense, who's been so dominant for so long, they did have a lot of injuries. But they are getting up there in years. It's that core, some of those guys you mentioned, Richard Sherman's another who had a season-ending injury, that they've been around for a long time, and they just continue getting older, and we've seen kind of the regression of this once dominant defense, and it's not enough to carry them anymore. They've got to add some more pieces here to this team, and it would be interesting to see if they can retool and come back. I know one big piece that's going to be a free agent coming up is Jimmy Graham, who they've relied on very consistently the last couple of years, feeding him a lot, especially in the red zone around the end zone. He's one of their best when it comes to scoring on that team. And if they lose him, that's another major concern for this team. And those concerns keep adding up. And we've seen Russell Wilson have some injuries in the past. I know he played a lot of last year injured. That's something that could really hurt them. And I think if he goes down, this team could drop down to a 4-12 team, a 5-11 team if they're missing Russell Wilson for a good portion of the season.
Absolutely. I said that a few weeks ago. I mean, you think about where this team would have been this year if Russell Wilson wasn't their quarterback. I mean, he single-handedly won them a handful of games. I mean, the Eagles game, he won them, and a few others. I mean, the Arizona game, I remember when they were in those green uniforms where he had that crazy play to Doug Baldwin that put the game out of reach. I mean, yeah. I mean, this is probably, you're right, probably a 4 or 5 win team without Russell Wilson. But they have some work to do going forward. It's going to be an interesting offseason in Seattle.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll move from that game onto the AFC West. Had 2 teams trying to establish their position in the playoffs there. Jacksonville ended up losing to Tennessee in this game 15-10, which we talked before about how good Jacksonville has looked. They do not look good heading into the playoffs here, which is not where you want to be. Blake Bortles had a point where he was playing very well. I know we talked about it 2 weeks ago. His recent stats were comparable to Drew Brees at that time, and he really dropped off towards the end of the season. It seems like they've been relying on him a lot more. He threw 34 times in this game, completed only 44% of his throws, didn't throw a touchdown, threw 2 interceptions. That really, really hurts them when they have to rely on him. He's outplayed what he's done last year, but now these last 2 weeks, he's really started to look like the kind of struggling quarterback he looked like last year. And on the other side, this Tennessee team just nosedived completely towards the end of the season there. They had some bad losses here. They finally pick up this win against a good team and kind of back their way into the playoffs. This is an odd team here to me, but congratulations on them being able to sneak in somehow with a mess of weird things happening towards the bottom of that AFC playoff group.
Yeah, look, Tennessee wins, but and gets into the playoffs. But if you're a Tennessee fan, I mean, you can't be too excited. I mean, they win, but it's not a very pretty game. I mean, I think if you're a Tennessee fan and they were able to win this game, 28-10, yeah, you're thinking, all right, that's good. That's a nice springboard into the next week, and we'll see kind of what can happen. But I mean, it's a very sloppy game. They win it with field goals for the most part. Things just, you can't have a lot of hope if you're a Tennessee fan. I don't think Tennessee gets past the first game. You and I have pretty much been on record saying we don't think they win a game in the playoffs going forward. And they are going to. They did get in, and I still stand by it. Don't think they win a game. As far as Jacksonville, one thing again on the podcast, Zach, you and I said, if this team doesn't turn the ball over, they're dangerous. Mm-hmm. If they do, the last 2 weeks are prime examples of what can happen. Last week, 3 turnovers against the Niners, they lose. This week, 4 turnovers against the Titans, they lose. You turn the ball over when you're a team like Jacksonville, where you're kind of on the fringe. You had a nice year. You're the 3 seed, but you're not New England. You're not Pittsburgh, teams that can turn the ball over yet make up for it. The Jaguars just aren't in that situation right now, not yet anyway. They can't turn the ball over. They did, and they got to stop doing it because going into next week, they can't afford to do it. And playoff football, turnovers are extremely important. So Jaguars, man, you obviously wish they were going into the playoffs on a higher note. But look, it's a brand new season. Whatever happened in the past is over. You put the blinders on and you just focus on the playoffs and you focus on one game at a time. So I still think, though, if the Jaguars can limit the turnovers, they're a tough out because of that defense.
Yeah, the defense is definitely what carries this team. They only scored 10 points in this game. Their only touchdown was a defensive touchdown.
Exactly.
So I think they're going to have a hard time if they get down, especially if they get down multiple scores in the playoffs. But that defense is what can keep them in it. And then if Blake Bortles had 5 interceptions the last 2 games after having 8 the first 14 games. So if he's going to do that, I don't really see them having a chance in the playoffs. But if they can keep him under wraps where he's not turning it over, he's making good decisions, he doesn't have to rely on any kind of big plays, like you said, this can be a dangerous team going forward into the playoffs here. So we'll move from there into the finale for the NFC South, which was the toughest division in football. And the first game we'll get to here was Atlanta and Carolina. They both came in needing a win for their seeding, for Atlanta to make the playoffs, to lock in their spot. They really needed this win, and they looked like it, not from the start, but I'd say about the second quarter on. This was kind of an ugly game early on after Devonta Freeman had a good touchdown really early on, and then it went more of the Panthers' way there in the second quarter. It was just a little bit ugly there, and the Panthers just looked bad this whole game. They had no rushing attack at all. It was ugly. They were missing Jonathan Stewart, but they just didn't get much of anything going from any of those guys they were trying to feed the ball to, and really went away from that, put it more in Cam Newton's hands, and he didn't do much with it, just constantly overthrowing people throughout the entire game. Devin Funchess did have a touchdown, but they're in a weird situation. Having traded away Kelvin Benjamin, who was their number one receiver, they just don't have someone else reliable as a receiver on that team. It's Christian McCaffrey coming out of the backfield. They line him up different ways. But overall, an ugly game on both sides. But the Falcons came to play there in the second half, ended up winning 22-10 in this game. Even though there's a lot of field goals there in the fourth quarter. They kicked 3 different field goals, 5 total in the second half. They've really relied on that. So I feel like if they were playing a better Panthers team, this Panthers team has looked good at times this year. They looked terrible in this game. If the Panthers looked like they had in other games, Atlanta wouldn't have had a chance. But in this particular game, Atlanta was able to win. I don't want to say easily by a score, but it was still, they just struggled through this game. This game was very ugly to me, if you can't tell from my description here.
No, it definitely was. I mean, it definitely was kind of an ugly game. I mean, Atlanta wins and they get in the playoffs, but you can't feel too great about them because, I mean, they didn't look special in this game by any means. And Carolina, who, they had seeding to play for, and they had the opportunity to get the first round bye, but with Minnesota winning at 1:00, maybe they saw that and thought, well, we don't have really anything to play for, so we're just going to go through the motions. I don't know, but for their sake, I hope that's what happened, because you don't want to go into the playoffs looking like that. You don't want your star quarterback, who I say star quarterback, I don't think he's anything special. If you know me, you've listened to me on any sort of, platform, I don't like Cam Newton. I don't think he's very good.
He's all they've got.
Right. That's right.
Important to them.
And as they go, as he goes, and he was 14 of 34 for 180 yards, 3 interceptions. And look what happened. They only scored 10 points. So, look, Atlanta, I don't think is going to make any noise in the playoffs. I think Atlanta's going to lose their first game. The Panthers, they'll go as Cam goes. I mean, if Cam can put on that cape and do Cam Newton things that we've seen from time to time, they have a shot. But again, I'm not as high on the Panthers as some other people are. So I'm not high on either one of these teams. I'm really not. I mean, if one of them could have won and got a home playoff game, won the division and got a home playoff game, maybe they make some noise, but I don't see it from either one of these teams. And I'm just not high on any one of these teams. And you're right, Zach. It was a very ugly game. You can't feel good if you're any one of these teams. I mean, if you're Carolina, yeah, you made the playoffs, but we didn't look good against Atlanta, where it would have been nice to go in on a good note. Atlanta, we get in, but we still struggled at time to time. The offense didn't look all that good, but it is what it is.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see how they perform in the playoffs. Like we've mentioned, this Panthers team's been very up and down. So has that Falcons team, although it has been more down. Like we talked about at the beginning of the season, I didn't even expect them to make the playoffs, and they barely snuck in here. So
Yep.
we'll move from those two teams having kind of disappointing finishes in a playoff year to another team with a disappointing finish in that same division, which is the New Orleans Saints. They finished the season 11-5 after losing 31-24 against a 5-11 Tampa Bay Buccaneers team. And this is, again, we keep saying this, but there's quite a few teams heading to the playoffs not finishing well. So it'll be interesting to see if this Saints team can rebound. I feel more confident in them just because they have, in my opinion, the best quarterback in the NFC, and it's not close in the playoffs currently. I think they have the best shot at rebounding from this miserable finish here and a loss to a 5-win team. And they have Drew Brees there. He was solid here, high completion percentage, threw for a touchdown, 245 yards. They didn't get much going there on the ground. They only gave 22 total carries. We've seen them get the ball a lot more to their running backs in other games throughout this year, and I think that's something they'll rely on more when they get to the playoffs here. So definitely not the finish they wanted. On the Tampa Bay side, it was interesting to see Peyton Barber lead them in yardage. He scored a touchdown there at the running back position, a position that has struggled throughout this year. He got some extra playing time towards the end, so we'll see if he can earn some kind of playing time in the future based off of that performance. Had a big game from former Penn State receiver Chris Godwin, 111 yards and a touchdown there. Adam Humphries also went over 100 yards for the Buccaneers. And Jameis Winston, not a good game for him when it comes to interceptions. He threw 3 interceptions. He did throw for 363 yards. Kind of finishes his down season on a down note, even though they did pull out the win. Don't really like seeing that, but hopefully he can rebound next year and have a better season, a more injury-free season than he did this year.
Yeah. As far as Tampa Bay, obviously they were one of the biggest disappointments in the NFL this year. That's been talked about. And, Dirk Cutter's going to be back for another year next year. It's going to be interesting to see, how things go next year. They had Hard Knocks before the season. That was kind of a distraction. And I think what happened was I think this team was feeling themselves. I do. I don't think this team had that hunger that we thought they were going to have in the beginning of the season and had something to prove. I think they were reading their own headlines, people saying they were good, they were going to make the playoffs, they could be a surprise team to make a Super Bowl run, and I think that got to their head. I think this could be a humbling experience for Tampa Bay, and I expect them to be better next year. There's just too much talent, I think, on that team for them to be this bad. So it'll be interesting to see how things go next year and into the offseason and what pieces they can add. As far as New Orleans goes, a few things. I agree with you, yes. Obviously, New Orleans has the best quarterback in the playoffs. I mean, obviously. I mean, Brees is a future Hall of Famer, and then a lot of the other quarterbacks are either backups or young guns that don't have a ton of playoff experience. So New Orleans definitely has that edge. I still wonder about the defense a little bit. And one thing I think that jumps out that you have to point out is this team is backing into the playoffs on the road. They have a home playoff game because they won the division. They'll have that home game to start in the wild card round. But moving the rest of the way, they got to go on the road to where they've lost their last 3 road games to finish things out. So that worries me a little bit. New Orleans historically isn't the best road team. They like to win 7-8 games in that dome a year and then try to squeak out 2 or 3 on the road somewhere along the way. So New Orleans is a team, they're a wild card to me. I could totally see them going to the Super Bowl. I could totally see that running game and Drew Brees carrying them and them getting to the Super Bowl. Or I could see them being one and done. It's just they're very up and down to me. So, but I don't like them. I don't like them, losing. And like you said, another team that's just backing their way into the playoffs. And it seems like almost every NFC team is backing their way into the playoffs. So it's going to be interesting to see Saturday and Sunday which teams shake off that loss and put their best foot forward.
Yeah, it will be exciting to see how it actually turns out here in the playoffs. And for me, it really makes it stand out on those top teams that have established those buys, how far ahead of the other teams they are compared to some of these teams that even have good records but are backing their way into their playoff positioning and into that upcoming wild card round here. So the next game we'll get to is the final playoff spot here. It's actually two different games we'll talk about here to establish that final playoff spot in the AFC, their wild card spot. First game we'll talk about was the Baltimore Ravens falling flat on their faces. All they had to do was win, and they're in. Nice and simple. Handle your business. You're playing a team who is guaranteed locked in to a losing record. They had 6 wins heading into the game. Could not pull out that win. So Cincinnati finishes with a 7-9 record after winning here against Baltimore. At the end of the game with 44 seconds left, they scored a touchdown. This game was very close throughout, kind of back and forth with Cincinnati consistently holding the lead until the Ravens had a fourth quarter touchdown from Mike Wallace. And just a hugely disappointing finish for this Baltimore team. They had such an easy schedule towards the end. We both talked about how even though the team has not performed well, not looked good, they had an easy schedule that basically was sending them to the playoffs, and they couldn't even finish it out for themselves and claim that spot.
Yeah, I think that goes to show you just the Ravens are what we thought they were. You and I were not particularly high on this team to start the year. I thought that they had one of the worst offenses in football to start the year. Defense showed some signs early that they could be a pretty solid defense throughout the year, and things were right there for them. I mean, you can't ask for a better situation than what they had, and to have a home game against a team that, I mean, it's cold. I mean, they don't want to be there. I mean, their head coach is on the hot seat. I mean, and not only did they lose, Zach, but I mean, at one point in this game, in the third quarter, I mean, they're down 24-10. I mean, they had to come back in this game. They had to come back from 14 points down and take a 3-point lead with just under 9 minutes to go, which you give them credit for doing that. But, I mean, it shouldn't be in that position. And then, I mean, I was talking to a buddy of mine today. I can't imagine being a Ravens fan. I mean, I wouldn't know. I would have done two things. I would have not done jack shit for New Year's, or I would have got so fucking hammered that I would have forgot anything that happened that day, especially the performance of that Ravens. I mean, it's 4th and 12. 4th and 12. You're at home. All you need is a stop. All you got to do is get a sack, an incompletion, an interception, whatever. Not only do they let him complete the pass for a first down, but they allow Tyler Boyd to rush and get in for the touchdown. I mean, that is an absolute joke. And the Ravens should be embarrassed, and they should be ashamed. And, they don't – I mean, you don't deserve to get into the playoffs when you do something like that. And, I'm glad they're not in the playoffs because I didn't think they were going to do much of anything. Anyway, I don't think any of these final two teams that was going to get the last playoff spot is going to do anything anyway. But I was rooting for the last team that we're going to talk about to get this playoff spot, and I'm glad they did. But because Baltimore lost, it opened the door for
the Buffalo Bills, who finished with 2 of their last 3 games against the same Miami Dolphins team. And they were able to win both matchups here against the Dolphins. This one was 22-16. One of my friends from where I grew up, one of the few Bills fans I know in my life, but I saw him post after this game. He said it's the first time the Bills have made the playoffs since he's been in 4th grade. So he's now like 27, 28, something around there. So
1999, Zach.
Yeah, that has been a long, long time.
You remember the Music City Miracle, right?
I definitely do.
That was the last playoff game they won. Or excuse me, we're in.
Yeah, they lost.
That was the last game they were in, excuse me. Yeah. That's crazy because that seems like forever ago, and it really was.
Yeah. It definitely that's wild that they haven't been in the playoffs since the 90s. Since 1999 there. It's been a long time. So respect to them for claiming this spot. It has not been a pretty season. They went through that benching of Tyrod Taylor for Nathan Peterman at one point.
And think about that. Had they not done that and won that game, they would have already been in the playoffs. They wouldn't have even needed this game. And they get through the whole Nathan Peterman debacle, thankfully.
Yeah, I still don't know because the Chargers were kind of getting hot at that point. So right. I don't know that they would have been able to still win that regardless. But to finish out and claim a playoff spot, this is a team I was very confident saying about halfway through the season that they didn't have a chance at the playoffs. They didn't look good. They, like we said, with going through that debacle of starting Nathan Peterman, then giving it back to Tyrod Taylor, LaShawn McCoy has really been their only standout player. And the unfortunate thing for them is he's currently injured. He might not be able to play in their upcoming playoff game. And if he doesn't, that doesn't leave them with much. They just haven't had much this entire year. Tyrod Taylor's done solidly without much of a cast around him. So, like I said, respect for this team for making the playoffs. I really thought, and a lot of other people also really thought, that they would have a losing season. They wouldn't be close to the playoffs. But good job making it. I don't see them going anywhere with it. But still, it's fun to see them finally back in the playoffs.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, to not make the playoffs since 1999, I mean, you got to be happy for the city of Buffalo. You got to be happy for their fans after all this just, down seasons. And for that, I mean, I don't know if you saw the celebration in the locker room when they were watching the ending of the Ravens game. That was cool. I mean, that's so cool. That's what it's all about. I mean, they were watching it in the locker room as a team and celebrating when the Bengals scored there. So that's awesome. Good for them. But it is unfortunate that it looks like that. And even if LaShawn McCoy plays, I mean, how healthy and how effective is he going to be with that ankle injury? So that's a shame. But you got to be happy for them. And you got to be happy for their fans. They were able to find a way to get into the playoffs, and who knows? I mean, we've seen teams get on runs before that you wouldn't think could make a run. They play Jacksonville. Jacksonville's kind of limping into the playoffs, backing in. Who knows? We'll see what can happen. I don't think that they can make a run, but we've seen a lot of wild things happen in the playoffs. That's for sure.
Thank you so much for listening to the Lifelong Rivals Sports Podcast. We really appreciate it. We've changed some things up based on some of the feedback we've received, so we'd love to continue hearing your feedback. As we continue to build this platform with our podcast, it's very helpful to us if you can share it with the people you know that you think would be interested. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and have a great week.